call themselves an architect in the UK, legally they have to be registered with the ARB, the Architects Registration Board. But who are they, what they do, and why they're so important? To begin with, we'll start with the origin. They were originally known as the Architects Registration Council of the UK, and they were set up in 1931 under the Architects Registration Act. They became the Architects Registration Board in 1997 under the Architects Act 1997. Essentially, the ARB regulates the architect's profession in the UK to ensure that good standards of practice and conduct are maintained within the profession. And they're an independent public interest body that is a public corporation of the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. They have 6 main duties under the Architects Act, and these are prescribing or recognising the qualifications needed to become an architect, keeping the UK Register of Architects, ensuring that architects meet the standards of practice and conduct, investigating complaints made about an architect's conduct or practice or competence, making sure that only people on their register offer services as an architect, act as the UK's competent authority for architects. So essentially, prescribing qualifications means defining what is required from an academic viewpoint to be admitted to the register. And these are what I set out in my original video on how to become an architect. So essentially, what's required from parts 1, 2 and 3. Keeping the register means ensuring responsibility for those legally allowed to call themselves an architect in the UK. However, it's members' responsibility to make sure they pay their fees each year, to ensure that renewal and they're added back onto the register, that kind of thing. The Alb Standards of Conduct are summed up in 12 points, which are: as an architect, you're expected to, number 1, be honest and act with integrity. So essentially this means don't lie, be honest, and it also deals with, when you look at the finer points, conflicts of interest, not misrepresenting anything and not making any false statements, essentially. And that leads into number 2, be competent. So once again, this is essentially just addressing what it says: be competent, be able to do what you say you can do, make sure you have those skills, keep your skills relevant and up to date. So there are ways of also making sure you're able to stay on top of this. So attending CPDs, keeping up to date with relevant changes in building regulations, that kind of thing. And any sort of changes in specific building methodology, that's a key thing to be aware of as well. Then there's number 3, promote your services honestly and responsibly. So if you're a business owner or you're running your own architectural service, don't lie about what you do as a business. Don't misrepresent it in any way at all. Again, this sort of comes back to being honest and acting with integrity. But you've got as a practicing architect, you've got a responsibility on your shoulders that your style of practice should represent what you're doing. That, you know, if you've got a client and anything changes within the practice that might affect the job, such as who's working on it, what's available to hand to work on the project, if that changes, you've got to notify the client straight away, and make sure that, you know, your architectural work's under control, really, and that you are, as a business owner, are responsible. And that does lead into quite nicely into number 4, which is manage your business competently. So essentially, when you've got to manage your business competently, there's quite a lot to address. But to keep it short, when you undertake a job, knowing that you've got the ability to run that job properly, that you've got the means to do that, really. Also, you know, as a business owner, making sure that you comply with all legislation, that, you know, you're able to keep it running, that kind of thing, and that you're not breaking any laws. But obviously, with being an architect as well, you've got to consider how what you do might be affected as well. So, you know, just make sure that you've got methodology in place to work out fees, make sure you've got appropriate contracts in place, and that kind of thing, really. And then number 5 is consider the wider impact of your work. So this is quite short and sweet on the ARB's website, and when you do a job, consider how it's going to affect the environment, and that can be quite a broad statement, really, but essentially environmental impact, nature of the building around it, so, you know, if you're building a conservation area, that kind of thing, and also the resources that you're using to build it. Is it going to be an unnecessarily heavy carbon footprint, that kind of thing. So it's quite, it can, perceiving it in a broad manner is quite helpful, really. And then number 6, carry out your work faithfully and conscientiously. So when you perform work, make sure that you do it with skill, care, and make sure that you perform in a professional manner. Again, and I think, like I say, when you undertake work, really, you should make sure that you've got methods in place to make sure you're able to do that. So, i.e., contracts, that kind of thing. So that means the work's kind of outlined what's going to be undertaken. And number 7 is quite an interesting one, which is be trustworthy and look after your client's money properly. This is quite an interesting one, really, and I think the main thing here is you are always kind of dealing with money coming in, that kind of thing. So keeping records of the money that's sort of being dealt with, so with fee agreements, that kind of thing, as long as they're comprehensive, that kind of deals with that. But also, more interestingly, it deals with a situation where if the client's asking you to sort of perform their job, really handle their money, that if you do so, you handle that money very, very carefully. So what you do is you set up a separate bank account for that money, for the client's money. Any interest borne on that account, I suppose, would be the correct phrase. Any interest on that account is the client's money, and once the project's done, any sort of money left over from that is handed back to the client, because that's their money at the end of the day. So like I said, that's quite an interesting one. It's something to be very aware of, because although it's a rare situation, it can happen. The number 8, have appropriate insurance arrangements. Now this is, obviously you've got sort of basic insurances as a business, so insurance covering sort of day-to-day running, that kind of thing, and covering your employees as well, that kind of thing. But also, there's something in architecture called professional indemnity insurance, and making sure that you've got the appropriate amount of professional indemnity insurance, or PII, is very important. So undertaking work where you don't have that kind of cover or don't have the appropriate runoff could see you falling foul of that rule, really. But also, it's definitely very much worth making sure you've got that in place before you take on a job, because obviously anything that's not covered by that insurance, you're liable for. So if you don't have that insurance, you are acting in an unprofessional manner. And then number 9, maintain the reputation of architects. And again, this is quite an interesting one because it can be quite broad. So once you're qualified and you've registered with the ARB, everything you're doing as an architect. And I think what's really a real big takeaway from this is, if you commit a crime, you can be in breach of this rule, because you've committed a crime as an architect. You've not maintained the reputation of architects. Essentially, it's making sure that you act appropriately, you act with morals and with regulation and legislation, really. That essentially you perform well as an individual and as a member of society, because once you register with ARB, you're doing that as a member of society that is an architect. Then number 10, deal with disputes or complaints appropriately. So there's very specific rules with architects when it comes to complaints. So when a complaint comes in, it needs to be acknowledged within 10 working days, and it needs to everything raised in that initial complaint needs to be addressed within 30 days from its receipt. And obviously, if it can't be settled, practice needs to have ways of alternate dispute resolution, such as mediation and things like that. So making sure you've kind of got arrangements for that in a contract is always quite important. But it's worth noting that you should be aware of what is required of you when complaints do come in. So then number 11, cooperate with regulatory requirements and investigations. So essentially, if you come under investigation, be this as an architect or a business, that kind of thing, that you comply with those investigations. So, handing over financial records if, say, you're being investigated for fraud or anything like that, or, as an architect, if you're being investigated for misconduct or anything like that you hand over email chains, comply with them, be honest, open, that kind of thing. Then number 12, have respect for others. So essentially treat everyone fairly, don't discriminate against anyone, don't essentially shove anyone out. You've got a duty as an architect to be fair and even when it sort of comes to competitors, you shouldn't try and cheat to get ahead of them, that kind of thing. And I think what's kind of important with that is as well, even when it comes to competitors, you may end up working with them at some point. It's not unheard of for architects to sort of form a collaboration to perform a project. So essentially, this, I'd say, as an individual, you should doing this anyway. But yeah, it's also a regulation. But what's also of note is this as well is with the ARB and these rules. If a client's unhappy with an architect or feels that they're not acting in a professional manner or not doing the work as they should be, the client can report an architect to the ARB. So it's there to protect the client as well as the architect. Investigating complaints against an architect's conduct or practice means that the ARB are responsible for investigating any complaints submitted to them about a member of the register where they may have acted in contradiction to the standards of practice or may not have behaved with due diligence in the course of their work. And if found guilty of unacceptable professional conduct, otherwise known as UPC, by the ARB's Professional Conduct Committee, the PCC, a party can be issued one of the following punishments based on the severity of their actions and if it is deemed necessary to protect the public from the individual and their actions. These are a reprimand, essentially a warning, a penalty order, a fine, suspension of the register, which means they're sort of temporarily not allowed to call themselves an architect for a set period of time up to a maximum of 2 years, or they face complete erasure from the register altogether. Now, erasure from the register is rare, but it's also worth noting that all of the PCC hearings are available online on the ARB's website, and they give the outcome of them and what the punishment was if one was handed down. So it's worth looking at that from time to time just to see what's going on. Also, making sure that only people on the register offer their service as architects means taking action against those who use the title of architect without being on the register, as this is a criminal offence. However, it is worth noting that the ARB will typically issue warnings to an individual before taking legal action against them to allow any rectification of a potential mistake that may have been made by the individual. And of course, it's the simplest resolution to the problem, i.e. someone's calling himself an architect when they shouldn't, ask them to stop, they realise they shouldn't be doing that, and they stop. That's simple. Also, although it's a criminal offence to call yourself an architect without being on the register, it isn't an offence to perform the duties of an architect, duties typically associated with an architect, if you aren't using the title. So, in short, there's protection of title but not a function. And then finally, acting as the UK's competent authority for architects means that they're the body responsible for overseeing architects and being responsible for registration and discipline within the UK, really. The ARB has a lot of information on the website. It's really worth checking out. I'll leave some links below. So that'll, on there, if you have a look around, you can find information on codes of conduct, about themselves, complaint processes, and more information on what's expected from architects. It's worth mentioning as well, the ARB shouldn't be confused with the RRBA. They're two separate organisations, and the RRBA, it's optional to join them, whereas ARB, you legally have to join them if you want to call yourself an architect. I'll be doing a video on the RRBA in the near future, so stay tuned for that. Hopefully, sort of gives you an overview of what the ARB is about. If you've got any questions, want to comment on my videos, anything like that, please feel free to comment below. Feel free to subscribe to get more information on when videos come out. And until then, I'll see you later.